picture a modern geopolitical titan, a world leader who, helped tear down the Iron Curtain.
Right, a massive figure.
Exactly. Someone who offered massive volumes of philosophy and commanded the attention of over 1 billion followers across the globe.
Yeah.
Now, hold that image in your mind, and right next to it, I want you to picture a 17th century Italian shoemaker who referred to himself as a donkey.
Quite the contrast.
Right. And he spent his days basically cracking jokes with housewives. On the surface, it sounds like the setup to a really bizarre historical joke.
It totally does, yeah.
But when you look at the stack of sources we have for you today, you realize these two vastly different figures are actually deeply intertwined.
It really is one of the most jarring historical juxtapositions you could, put together on a desk.
Welcome to this custom deep dive. Today we're looking at a Wikipedia article and some translated historical text detailing the life of a 17th century friar named Crispin of Viterbo.
Alongside an October 2003 edition of an archdiocesan newspaper called The Criterion.
Yes, and that newspaper celebrates the 25th anniversary of Pope John Paul II's papacy.
You have the hyper-local, completely obscure world of a medieval-style friar on one side, and then the hyper-documented global machinery of the modern Vatican on the other.
And the mission of our deep dive today is to explore exactly how those two worlds collided, because they are actually linked by a very specific monumental event in 1982.
We're going to look at their contrasting approaches to faith and leadership and human connection.
To uncover what the shoemaker and the Pope can teach you about how true lasting legacy is actually built.
Because it's not always what you'd expect.
Okay, let's unpack this. To understand the global leader, we have to start by understanding the shoemaker. So let's drop into 1668 in a rural district of Viterbo, Italy.
Okay.
We have a kid named Pietro Fioretti. His father dies when he's young, and his uncle takes him in as an apprentice in a shoe shop.
Just a normal working-class kid.
Exactly. He's an ordinary, pious kid educated by Jesuits. But the sources note a really specific turning point in 1693. He sees Franciscan procession moving through the town.
And something about that visual just completely rewires his life plan.
Yeah, what was it about that procession?
Well, that visual of poverty and devotion, it awakens something radical in him. He decides to walk away from the shoe shop entirely.
Wow.
Yeah, and he applies to the Order of Friars Minor Capuchin, which is a strict offshoot of the Franciscans.
Right, the guys with the brown robes and the hoods.
Exactly. And when he joins, he strips away his old identity and takes the name Crispin. From there, he spends his life in places like Orvieto and Rome.
But it's important to understand the hierarchy here, right? Because he doesn't go to a seminary to become some great theological thinker.
Oh, no, not at all. He never rises to any sort of high-ranking clerical position.
He becomes the cook, the gardener. He's the infirmarian tending to the sick during epidemics.
Just entirely manual, service-level labor.
Yeah, but his defining role, the one he held for 40 years in Orvieto, was the questor. And my understanding is that the questor was basically the friar whose full-time job was to go out into the streets and beg.
That's exactly it. The questor was responsible for gathering alms. So, literal food and donations just to support the friary and the local poor.
Which is pretty intense.
Extremely.
Yeah.
Because in a highly stratified, status-obsessed 17th century Italian society, begging in the streets is absolute bottom-tier social standing.
But reading the historical accounts, he was wildly popular doing it.
He was a local celebrity.
Yeah, the local housewives loved him so much that when his superiors tried to reassign him to a different town, the townsfolk practically revolted.
They literally refused to give alms to anyone else.
It's hilarious, and part of that appeal was his incredible, almost aggressive self-deprecation.
Like a modern anti-influencer.
Yes. When people asked him why he never wore a hat, whether it was freezing rain or beating sun out, his go-to response was, an ass does not wear a hat.
He fully embraced this title of the beast of burden, the donkey of the Capuchins.
He even told his superior once, Brother Crispin is an ass, but his halter is in your hands. So when you want him to go or to stop, pull or ease up on the halter.
It's a really fascinating rhetorical device when you dig into it.
Hmm.
By owning the absolute lowest possible status, he insulated himself from all the ego traps of his era.
I do struggle to see how calling yourself a donkey translates to actual influence, though. I mean, doesn't that just invite the nobles and the wealthy elites to walk all over him?
You would think so.
Yeah, like if you tell people you're a beast of burden, won't they just treat you like dirt?
Well, what's fascinating here is that it actually functioned as a highly sophisticated social tool. Think of him kind of like a medieval court jester.
Oh, interesting.
Right. The jester was often the only person in the entire kingdom who could relentlessly mock the king right to his face and keep his head.
Because they're just a fool.
Exactly. The humor and the low status acted as a Trojan horse for the truth. In the 18th century, class and rank dictated who could speak to whom.
Right.
But by positioning himself as a literal donkey, Crispin completely bypassed those social barriers. It allowed him to deliver what his contemporaries called holy cautions.
So the self-deprecation was almost like a shield that let him throw punches upward.
Precisely. He could tell hard truths to powerful people without triggering that defensiveness that usually comes from the nobility when they're challenged by someone beneath them. I mean, you can't be offended by a donkey.
That perfectly explains the gout story.
Oh, that's a great one.
There's this amazing anecdote in the texts about a wealthy pharmacist in Orvieto. The guy is suffering from terrible gout in his foot. And because Crispin has this reputation as a holy man, the pharmacist asks him for a miraculous cure.
And Crispin does not give him a sweet blessing.
No. Crispin looks at him and essentially says, "Your problem isn't gout in your foot. It's gout in your hands, because you aren't paying your workers fair wages and your servants are crying."
It's just so bold.
It's a brutal economic critique wrapped in a joke, delivered right to a powerful man.
He used humor to puncture hypocrisy, basically. He grounded these lofty theological concepts in gritty, everyday reality. And he fiercely guarded that low status.
He really did.
When people eventually started to revere him and treat him like a living idol, he absolutely hated it.
Like the story in Montefiascone, where a crowd actually surrounded him and started trying to cut pieces off his cloak to keep his holy relics.
Yeah, that really set him off.
He doesn't do the humble, polite cleric routine at all. He shouts at them. He tells them they'd be better off cutting the tail off a dog.
Just completely dismissive.
He yells, "So much din for a passing donkey. Go to church and pray to God." He aggressively, violently refused to be put on a pedestal.
Which brings us to the ultimate brilliant irony of his entire story.
Right.
Despite a lifelong, concentrated effort to remain a simple beast of burden, he would eventually be elevated to the highest possible pedestal the Catholic Church has to offer.
Right, because Crispin dies on May 19th, 1750, of pneumonia in Rome. And the sources note a strange detail here. His remains were exhumed much later, in 1959, and were found to be incorrupt.
Which is the historical term used when a body mysteriously avoids normal physical decomposition over centuries.
Right, so he has this massive local cult of personality, and he is beatified, which is the step right before sainthood in 1806.
But
then nothing. He sits in historical limbo for over a century and a half. He isn't officially canonized as a saint until June 20th, 1982.
And that specific date in 1982 is the hinge of our entire discussion today.
Yes.
Because Crispin of Viterbo was the very first saint canonized during the pontificate of Pope John Paul II.
That is the part I keep tripping over. Think about the backlog of historical figures waiting in the wings for sainthood in the 1980s.
It was a massive list.
Right. You have martyrs, brilliant theologians, founders of massive hospital networks. Why would a modern, highly intellectual, geopolitically focused pope like John Paul II look at that list and say, yes, the 17th century friar who called himself a donkey and yelled at housewives. That's my guy, that's the first one.
Because it wasn't an accident, it was a deeply calculated message. By choosing Crispin, John Paul II was signaling the core philosophy of his new papacy.
He was making a statement.
He was laying out a roadmap for the world, really. He understood that he was operating on a massive, unprecedented global scale, but he wanted his papacy built on elevating the simple, the human, and the culturally authentic.
Wow.
He recognized that Crispin's localized, ground-level authenticity, his refusal to be swallowed by power dynamics, was exactly the medicine the highly manicured, globalized modern world was hungering for.
Here's where it gets really interesting. Because to understand that global machinery, let's jump forward into our second source. We're looking at the October 2003 edition of the Criterion.
A fascinating time capsule.
It really is. It captures John Paul II at his 25-year mark as Pope. And the picture it paints of him is incredibly raw. One columnist describes seeing the Pope that year, and he's slumping in his chair, he's drooling, he's slurring his words.
Yeah, he is losing a very public, brutal battle with Parkinson's disease.
Right.
And in the realm of global leadership, that kind of physical vulnerability is usually hidden at all costs. You think of world leaders covering up strokes or illnesses, managing their PR to project constant strength.
Always projecting strength, yeah.
But the columnist notes that the Pope's determination to push on and his active choice to publicly display his physical frailty to the cameras was profoundly inspiring to millions.
It's the ultimate anti-image control. It actually reminds me of Crispin refusing to wear the hat. It's an embrace of weakness.
Exactly.
But before his physical decline, the sheer statistical weight of what John Paul II accomplished is almost hard to process. This 2003 newspaper lays out the stats.
They're staggering.
He had visited 129 countries. He logged over 700,000 miles. That means he spent more than 10% of his entire papacy physically outside the borders of Italy.
He fundamentally revolutionized the mechanics of the office. For centuries, the dynamic of the papacy was magnetic. Catholics traveled to Rome to see the Pope.
Right, he was the center.
But John Paul II reversed that polarity. He took the institution out from behind the Vatican walls and physically brought it to the doorstep of the modern world.
Which is huge.
And we're not just talking about visiting comfortable cathedrals in Europe. He went to refugee camps. He went to slum neighborhoods in Latin America. He went to the United Nations.
He also authored over 50 major documents. The source specifically highlights his very first encyclical, which is essentially a major formal letter circulated to the entire global church called Redemptor Hominis. And it set the tone for everything that followed, focusing heavily on fundamental human dignity. But operating on that kind of global stage, traveling constantly, writing constantly, meant navigating intense, highly publicized controversies.
Absolutely. And the 2003 newspaper source captures the very real political and cultural crossfire of that specific moment in time.
It's intense.
He was leading an ancient institution through the incredibly rapid cultural shifts of the late 20th and early 21st centuries.
And when you look at this October 2003 edition of the Criterion, you get a real snapshot of that crossfire. For example, the paper details the U.S. Senate passing a ban on partial birth abortion,
Right.
which was heavily praised by local leaders like Archbishop Buchlein, tying it directly to the Pope's defense of human life against what he termed a culture of death.
It was a huge talking point.
And reading this, it's really important to note for you listening that we aren't here to litigate the politics of the era, whether it's that legislation or the intense debates over women's ordination mentioned in the text.
Our goal isn't to take sides.
Exactly. We are simply looking at the sheer volume of pressure he willingly stepped into, because the text outlines how he faced immense pushback from all across the political spectrum.
The source material highlights this dual friction beautifully. He frustrated traditionalists within his own ranks who were angry at his unprecedented interreligious outreach.
Right.
And simultaneously, he angered progressives who wanted him to alter the church's firm stances on things like women's ordination and human sexuality. He refused to fit neatly into modern political categories.
And his willingness to broke categories extended to how he handled history itself?
Yes, his approach to institutional history was revolutionary. Against considerable resistance from his own inner circle, who thought it made the church look weak, he commissioned studies and publicly apologized for historical errors.
Which just wasn't done.
Never. He formally apologized for the condemnation of Galileo, the abuses of the Inquisition, and the failings of church members during the Holocaust.
Not to mention the interreligious dialogue. He prayed at the Western Wall in Jerusalem. He became the first pope to step inside a mosque in Syria.
Yeah.
He held these vast prayer meetings in Assisi with leaders of multiple world religions.
So when you look at the sheer weight of that, managing a bureaucracy of over 1 billion people, dealing with complex Cold War geopolitics, taking fire from both the left and the right, and constantly traveling.
It's exhausting just listing it.
It really is. It raises a massive question. How does a man operating at that velocity maintain his fundamental spiritual grounding? How does the globe-trotting pontiff actually share the same internal DNA as the donkey of the Capuchins?
I was trying to map this out while reading the sources, and it turns out, despite the massive gap in centuries and scale, they share incredibly strong foundational pillars.
They really do.
The first one that practically leaps off the page is a profound, almost obsessive devotion to Mary. For Crispin, his mother consecrated him to Mary at a local shrine when he was young, and from then on, he referred to her as his other mother.
Oh.
Yeah, he even built a small, crude altar dedicated to her right in the kitchen where he was cooking for the other friars.
And for John Paul II, that devotion was equally central, born out of early trauma. As a young man in Poland, his own mother died when he was just 9 years old.
I didn't realize he was that young.
Yeah, it was tragic. So he found a profound psychological and spiritual anchor in Marian devotion. He famously chose the Latin phrase totus tuus, meaning completely yours. Yours is his papal motto, dedicating his entire global ministry to Mary.
He also firmly believes she physically intervened to save his life.
During the assassination attempt.
Yes, when he was shot by an assassin in St. Peter's Square in 1981, it happened on the exact feast day of Our Lady of Fatima.
And he took that connection very seriously.
He believed in that connection so deeply that he later ordered the mysterious Third Secret of Fatima published, which described a bishop in white falling under gunfire because he believed it prophesied his survival.
It's a striking parallel.
So for both the shoemaker and the pope, this wasn't just abstract, high-level theology. It was a deeply personal, protective relationship that kept them grounded.
The second shared pillar is what we might call a philosophy of real-world grit. Neither of these men believed that ascending in the spiritual life somehow shielded you from suffering, depression, or, human weakness.
This is where that 2003 Criterion source gives us a brilliant piece of context. The paper features a large section on the beatification of Mother Teresa, which happened that same year.
Right.
They cover a keynote speech given by an archibald named Lambert, who actually knew Mother Teresa personally, and he shares a striking detail. Despite being globally recognized as a living saint, Mother Teresa suffered through intense, prolonged periods of spiritual darkness where she felt absolutely no joy or connection in her prayer.
She called it the dark night of the soul.
Exactly. She knew the actual work of serving the slums was brutal and unglamorous, which is why she required a grueling 9 years of formation before allowing her sisters to take final vows.
9 years is a massive commitment. And that article includes a quote from Archibald Lambert that acts as the perfect bridge between Crispin and John Paul II.
Oh, the blood quote.
Yes. He used to tell Mother Teresa's sisters during their training, "Scratch and you find blood, we're all alike underneath."
Scratch and you find blood. That metaphor just cuts through everything. It cuts through the robes, the titles, the centuries. Crispin understood that blood when he refused to let the crowds treat him like a magical relic and yelled at them to go pray to God instead.
Absolutely.
And John Paul II understood that blood when he let the global television cameras broadcast his trembling hands and slurred speech to the world instead of hiding in his apartment.
They both recognized that humanity in all its brokenness, sickness, and mundane reality is the required starting point for any true spiritual elevation. You can't bypass the human condition to get to the divine.
But I still have a hard time reconciling the scale difference. John Paul II was a geopolitical mastermind who helped dismantle communism. Crispin was a guy who called himself a donkey and begged for bread. They both had this obsession with staying connected to the ground level of humanity. But how on earth did John Paul II actually maintain that connection while living inside the isolating machinery of the Vatican?
Well, if we connect this to the bigger picture, the psychological mechanism he used to stay grounded was his relentless focus on youth.
Oh, right.
If you look at his history as a young bishop in Poland, he constantly took university kids on hiking trips, skiing, and canoe trips. He completely bypassed the formal clerical boundaries to just be with them.
That's pretty unusual for a bishop.
Very. And as Pope, he took that hyper-local impulse and scaled it up by instituting World Youth Day in 1984.
Getting hundreds of thousands, sometimes millions of kids gathering across the globe in a single field.
Yes, but the magic wasn't in the crowd size. It was in how he spoke to them. In an era where a lot of institutions were trying to pander to youth culture, trying to be cool and relevant.
And speak their language.
Right. He did the exact opposite. He didn't water down his message at all. The sources point out that he had a tremendous impact precisely because he held the moral bar incredibly high. He demanded greatness from them.
Wow.
He told them not to settle for the shallow, materialistic culture that was being sold to them.
He demanded they be countercultural, which, when you think about it, is exactly what Crispin did.
Exactly.
Crispin didn't coddle the nobles who came looking for easy blessings, and he didn't coddle the housewives. He was blunt. He had these demanding, gritty aphorisms. He would look at people and say, "Heaven is not made for armchairs," or "You won't reach heaven in a pair of slippers."
It's the ultimate paradox of authentic leadership. When you demand the absolute best from people, when you refuse to lower your standards, but you simultaneously acknowledge your own shared bloody humanity and vulnerability, it acts like a magnet.
It really does.
It builds an unbreakable trust. It worked for a 17th century friar begging in the streets, and it worked for a 20th century pope speaking to millions.
So what does this all mean? Bringing this all back to you listening to this right now, why have we take you on this journey? Why connect Pietro Fioretti, the shoemaker's apprentice, with Carol Wojtyla, the Pope who helped bring down the Iron Curtain?
It's about what we leave behind.
Right. What it means for you, whether you are navigating the complexities of a massive corporate hierarchy or living a deeply localized, community-focused life, is that true? Enduring influence relies on authenticity over polish.
It requires a very rare blend of unpretentious self-awareness.
Yeah.
You have to be willing to be the donkey who doesn't need the credit, the fancy hat, or the pedestal, but you must combine that humility with this steadfast, uncompromising commitment to your core values and the truth as you see it.
Legacy, it turns out, isn't about the size of the platform you stand on. It's about the depth of the truth you're willing to tell while standing there.
It does leave us with a fascinating, almost haunting question to consider as we close, though. We know Crispin's legacy survived for centuries, largely through oral tradition, through the fondness local people had for his quirks, his humor, and his bluntness.
Right. Passed down word of mouth.
Exactly.
Yeah.
John Paul II's legacy, on the other hand, is recorded in thousands of hours of high-definition video, massive archives of text, and endless photographs.
He's everywhere.
So it makes you wonder, in our modern, hyper-documented digital age, where every minor thought is published and curated, is it still possible for the quiet, quirky, hyper-local influence of someone like Crispin to be remembered centuries from now? Or have we engineered a society where only the globetrotters make history?
That is a phenomenal question to chew on. Can the local donkey still become a legend when everyone else is shouting on a global microphone? Can raw humanity outlast digital polish? Something to think about as you go about your day. Thank you for joining us on this deep dive into the unexpected ties that bind history together. We'll see you next time.